Hey guys, this is episode 54 of my videos. This is Thursday, March 14th, and I'm really happy to have Andrew from better known as AP Abacus on Twitter. Andrew, if you've been following the DCG Genesis saga, has been probably the source of truth. And we were just talking probably a couple months, 1 to 2 months before everybody else, in terms of the bankruptcy proceedings. I mean, Andrew called that we were going to go into bankruptcy. I think a month before I think anybody
Wow.
else was really talking about that. And then I just sort of latched onto this account and I was like, oh my god, this is great. And then as the ETF rolled out, Andrew sort of was on top of that one too. And so, I think I'm just I'm thrilled to have you here. When did you start getting the conviction that, first of all, the ETF was happening, Andrew, and also when did you get a conviction that this thing was going to kind of be a game changer for Bitcoin?
Probably about a year ago.
Okay.
There were, the grayscale suit was moving forward. So about a year to 16 months ago, the grayscale suit against the SEC took a giant leap forward and was effectively allowed to go forward. It was at that time that I started to get messages from legal minds and lawyers that were close to the Bitcoin ETF issuers and said, this is a big deal. If this happens, it's turbo time essentially for the ETFs. They'll get approved and, price discovery and price action will be something to behold. So, a year and a quarter, a year ago, I knew that there was a game changing effect that was kind of on its way. And so, when that actual hearing occurred, crypto Twitter, rightfully so, was, sort of enwrapped in those proceedings and even listening to them on the day that it happened. And the three panel appellate court was fairly clear that they didn't have an interest in some of the arguments that the SEC was making. So I got a lot of feedback from sources that said they're going to win this thing. It's way better than the 50-50. It's closer to 80-20. And, it will be nearly impossible for the SEC to refute or choose to deny Bitcoin ETFs when the clock effectively runs out. And that's exactly what happened.
And that was, I can't remember exactly, but I sort of remember vaguely it was June of last year that
Hmm.
was that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so you were kind of convinced of that. The Bloomberg guys were convinced of it as well, right? And
Uh-huh.
they
Yeah.
were very
Uh-huh.
right on this,
Yeah.
but not everybody was right. It was a difficult call to make,
Yeah.
and it was interesting. And then after that, of course, we had BlackRock come out and say they were going to file an ETF application. So, and
Yeah.
you had sort of Larry Fink on Fox News talking, and you know,
Yeah. That was if there was ever a bigger tell in the world of finance, I'm not entirely sure we'll see one for a long time. So you've got Larry Fink going out there and talking about Bitcoin slash crypto as digital gold, as a sovereignty issue, talking about if you don't trust your country. That's remarkable stuff from the founder and CEO of the largest asset manager on the planet. That is, there was a subsection of, let's call it crypto Twitter or finance, that were still doubting that Bitcoin ETFs were going to get approved. And I just thought they were crazy people. Like, you have a legal precedent that's been set. You have at the appellate court level, judges smacking down the SEC's arguments, and you have Larry Fink, who, for all intents and purposes, If you peel the curtain back far enough, is kind of the boss of Gary Gensler. I don't want to get too shadowy about it, but that's the reality, right?
Well,
Like,
he's also the inventor of the inventor of the securitized the CMO. It's I mean
sure,
this was the seminal moment in financialization, right?
sure,
And
sure.
you've been on Wall Street. I've been on Wall Street. What it was very clear to me that the financialization of this asset class was
Hmm.
going to be just an enormous deal, right? Just
Yeah.
because we've seen it with mortgages, we've seen it with REITs,
Mm-hmm.
and now we're seeing it with Bitcoin. So
Yeah, if you're Larry Fink and you're talking about the tokenization of real world assets, right? You're talking about the tokenization, the movement of money in a more efficient way, and frankly, if you're Larry Fink and you're talking about the tokenization of assets, he has already figured out that he can make more money with that concept than the current concepts in finance, right? He's already figured that out, and now it's just a particular march that he thinks is going to get him and his firm there, ergo get him and his industry there, in the shortest amount of time. The shortest
Mhm.
amount of time may be different for you and I, or different than the crypto Twitter degen that's buying the latest meme coin. But for them, it's a period of a couple years, 2, 3, 4 years. These guys live in a different world of time associated with than crypto Twitter does. But 2 years, 3 years, 4 years for them to be walking out the reality of tokenized assets, they've already figured it out. Is the point? They've already figured out that there's more money to be made in that type of world than the current world.
So okay, so you saw that. Let's
Hmm.
talk a little bit about your background on the Bitcoin side, right? So,
Sure.
you know, you it's rare I find to have the Wall Street crowd. They understand somewhat that we could make options trading and back office settlement more efficient, right? That's sort
Sure.
of your JP Morgan coming back and saying blockchain, not Bitcoin. They seem to
Yeah.
get that part great,
Yeah.
that
Uh-huh.
it's gonna
Right.
it's gonna make settlement of swaptions or
Yeah.
or all that mortgage collateral great.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
don't seem to understand Bitcoin very well.
Right.
What was it's very rare. It's not completely rare because Caitlin Long, for example, is a
Hmm.
Bitcoiner. She's a Wall Streeter.
Uh-huh.
She definitely understands Bitcoin as well as any Bitcoiner.
Yeah, she
Um,
spent a long time at Morgan Stanley. Yep.
right,
Hmm.
but she understands Bitcoin. She understands the concept of owning the Bitcoin asset.
Right.
What was it for you that you sort of you understood Bitcoin and the role of Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I sold a company in early 2016, and then took a year off, to just to recharge the engines. But I went to a bunch of events. I really was curious about Bitcoin at the time. I think in 2016 it hung around 400 to 600, 800
Yeah,
dollar level.
yeah.
And I was invited to a crypto hedge fund event that was
Okay.
one day only in San Francisco. And after being there for about 45 minutes, now some of that event was a little bit kooky. There was a little talk about, hyperbaric chambers and,
Right.
freezing yourself for 50 years and then coming back to life. But the financial part of Bitcoin and the amount of smart people in the room. And when I say smart people, there's a collection of folks in Bitcoin that I find remarkable. There's some of the smartest people in finance. There's some of the smartest people in computer science, and there's some of the smartest people in actual physical engineering, right, with miners. That is a trifecta of really really smart people. So I saw that there in that room of maybe 400 or 500 people. I saw it being spoken about, and I immediately knew, I'm like, this is the next thing. This
Okay.
is going to
All
be
right.
the next wave of things. So that's where it started. Hmm.
Okay, so you got bitten by sort of in 2016. You
hmm
obviously saw the whole meteoric rise in
Sure.
2017.
Mm-hmm.
Did you lose faith at all in that 2018 bear market? Did
No,
you?
no, no, not at all.
Okay.
Because conceptually, you're talking about hard money, you're talking about a hard asset, and somebody that's been in finance my entire career, that's the thing that resonates again and again and again. That never changes, right? Price can change, but
Right.
one Bitcoin will always be one Bitcoin, right? And so that hard asset, hard money narrative really never changed. Listen, I was around before anybody knew who Sam Bankman-Fried was, right?
Okay.
I was around when the rise of FTX actually happened around the election of 2020 because they had futures associated with election results. And that
Right.
was a viral moment for them. Most people don't
Hmm.
remember that stuff. They haven't been around long enough. I was around when he was king of the world and he had a posse moving around with him at the Bitcoin conference
Did you ever
2020.
meet him?
Yeah, yeah, I did
Okay.
in Miami at Bitcoin 2021.
Okay.
Um, weird guy, strange guy.
Hmm.
It is what it is, right?
Right.
So, I saw all of that stuff. I've seen the froth, I've seen the downturns, but
Just
the
on an
narrative.
aside, because I think you talked about this, and kind of.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've ever met Michael Lewis, but you've certainly read Michael Lewis.
Sure.
What do you think of Michael Lewis's latest, or I guess it's his latest book on Sam Bankman-Fried? It's a little strange, wouldn't you say?
I think it's bizarre, but I think it's also, some people just get siloed, right?
Okay.
I again don't want to go too far, down a conspiracy road associated with,
Yeah.
why and how Michael Lewis would decide to take this particular, road. But at the same time, post.
Okay. One second. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, we're good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
cut out there for a while.
so we talked about fraud a little bit, and
Mhm.
we before that we started recording, we talked a little bit about also the DCG stuff, right, which is sort of another offshoot of the Sam Bankman-Fried
Sure.
sort of debacle, right? So
Mhm. Mhm.
and we're sort of still living this, right, with Grayscale today, selling
Yeah,
every
yeah,
daily, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's going to continue to be a thing on a go forward basis. But I think there's really four types of folks that are selling GBTC.
okay,
I think you have creditors or those that have been hurt by the DCG conglomerate, right? Because 3 years ago, DCG was an absolute gorilla in the industry. You'd go to their website and you'd see 300 companies that they'd either bought, incubated, or owned parts of, and it was two-thirds of the current crypto ecosystem, right? Well, all those companies are
right,
basically dead, right? And all those founders that hitched their wagon to Barry and DCG also were big investors in Genesis, and they got hammered, right?
well,
They got
yeah,
lied to. So there's going to be people that hate Grayscale and hate Barry and Michael. They're going to sell. There's going to be people that were just playing the NAV trade, where it was at a discount to NAV. They're going to sell. There's going to be people who have reasonable financial advisors and say there's no way you should be paying 150 basis points for this product when you can get it for 12 basis points over at BlackRock. They're going to sell, right? And then there are going to be others that, don't have those three reasons, but they see that it's up. They see that Bitcoin's at a high. Maybe it's a good time to sell. It's tax season, whatever it happens to be. They're going to sell. So that's a lot of selling pressure, right? Most of it born of animus. So it'll probably continue. For Grayscale and their purposes, the reality is Bitcoin keeps going up. I don't see a space where we're looking at a meaningful downturn in Bitcoin's price in the near term. So that's going to work positively for GBTC and Grayscale. So we'll see where it goes. There's going to be continued, um, sales pressure, but at the same time, you've still got 28 billion in assets in GBTC because the price of Bitcoin is at what, 72, 73 right now?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So okay, so let's not worry too much about GBTC.
Uh-huh.
The flows into kind of sort of some of these GBTC flows have gone into the other ETFs, and
Sure. Uh-huh.
hard to pick exactly what the number is, and is it half of the selling or 35%, 40, whatever it is, right? That went into these other ones, but the total amount of flows into these new ETFs it's been pretty remarkable, right? So, you know,
Yeah.
I mean,
It-
if we look back at the estimates from Bloomberg, who are sort of like 15 billion for the
mhm,
year, I mean,
mhm.
we're well over that, in terms of total new Wall Street money that's come into this.
Yeah.
Where do you see this kind of being? Where do you see this thing continuing for the year? Where do you see us ending up on a flow basis for 2024?
Well, I think we probably end up north of 50 billion. And that assumes a fairly significant slowdown, right?
Right,
I think net new money, we're probably close to 25 billion right now, maybe 23 to 25.
right,
But with the increase in price of Bitcoin, it's north of 32.
yeah,
Um, if financial journalists were honest and objective, okay, um, I don't see a world unless there's some sort of massive global meltdown where Bitcoin ETFs, the price of Bitcoin, and the rise of this particular asset and asset class is not the story of 2024.
right,
It has blown away, completely blown away every estimate anybody had about first year inflows.
right.
Even the most bullish of most bullish of most bullish.
Standard Chartered was they came out with that 50 billion thing, and people were like, no, 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 that's a typo. They didn't
Yeah,
mean that.
you didn't mean to do that. Right, right.
Right.
And it is going to be more than that. It's
Yeah.
going to be more than that. So, we haven't got to. Well, I'll tell you a little story about what flows will continue to look like. So, I have a really good relationship with somebody in legal. Let's call it in and adjacent to BlackRock's IBIT product. They had a conversation with Rockefeller Wealth Management. Rockefeller's again, fairly well-known Wall Street wealth management firm. They're run by Greg Fleming, who left Morgan Stanley when he wasn't handpicked as the next CEO of Morgan Stanley. He left about 4 or 5 years ago. Big firm. They run a lot of money, ultra high net worth clients and teams. They flat out told BlackRock and IBIT and their group that did a presentation yesterday that, you know what, we're not interested right now. We're not going to add it to our platform. We're going to do another evaluation 3 months from now. We'll let clients have access to it probably at that time on an unsolicited basis, meaning clients have to come and basically demand to put it in their portfolio. But we're just not believers. That is that is nonsensical, right? That
Right.
is a nonsensical position for the best performing asset over the last decade, 3 years, 5 years, all the time frames that we talk about over and over again. It is remarkable to me the blind spot that people still on Wall Street and in finance can have about this asset. It boggles the mind, frankly.
When do you think that changes? End of 2024, 2025? When? When
Uh,
when does it become sort of normal that your normal portfolio has, 1 to 5% of Bitcoin? When's that happen?
Um, I think it's probably a longer tail than we think, which,
Okay.
by the way, makes current inflows even more profound,
Right.
right? So we're not anywhere near what you're talking about. We're probably a year to a year and a half away where we
Right.
begin to see allocations in the 1 to 5% level, right? We're,
Hmm.
I had a conversation with Josh Brown and his crew. He's the CEO of Whitholz Wealth Management. They run a podcast, Compound and Friends. It's a great podcast. And I talked to them and I said, "You guys are seeing these flows, right? Like this is remarkable." He's like, "Yeah, we're watching it, but we're not really talking about it with clients yet, right?" They run
Hmm.
a $4.5 billion RIA, a very high profile one, by the way.
Hmm.
Josh is on CNBC every week.
Right.
Barry writes in Bloomberg. The founder of that RIA, writes in Bloomberg every week. So, point being is that makes current flows that much more profound, and it makes ongoing turning on of spigots a continual thread of a reality of flows continuing to be fairly profound. So it's not like a tight window where there's just a flash crash
Right.
of assets into it. There's a lot of doors that haven't been opened yet.
Well, and that just if we've gone from you know let's call it right when this ETF was sort of around 25,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of when we were that was the price in June when the
Mm-hmm.
grayscale decision hit. Right, it was
Yep.
25,000. So
Mm-hmm.
we've basically tripled.
Sure.
We've tripled on really two solid months now. 60
Mm-hmm.
days worth of inflows, and and a bunch of anticipation and a lot of sell the news,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, but we've already tripled.
I think something that's interesting that BlackRock just did, where they're going to be adding, pure spot Bitcoin ETF as allocations to other ETFs that kind of cover almost the entirety of the market for them, right? I think that's going to be a potential backdoor way where Bitcoin starts to
Mhm.
become 1 to 2% of people's portfolios, and they may not even know it, right?
Right.
So I'll give you another example of quote unquote sentiment. Like we're at or near all time highs, but it just feels different this time. Like when we hit 69 last time, it was like the whole world. I remember 2021. Went to the Bitcoin conference. There's 16,000 people there. 2022, we're just kind of coming off the all time highs. There were 35,000 people there. Right? It was just
Right.
crazy. I have an ex-girlfriend who bought some Bitcoin in a couple years, and I messaged her and I said, "Hey, check out your Bitcoin." She's like, "I don't want to talk about that trash." And I'm like, "Uh, it's at $68,000." She's like, "What?" She's like, "Nah, I don't know. I don't want to. I don't want to fool with it." So she sold it at some point, but that's the kind of the narrative is.
Right.
It's been to your ordinary individual who only consumes a certain type of media. It's been hammered, right? It's been
Right.
bludgeoned. So that's going to have to change, and I think based on what I just said, that the initial 1 to 2% allocation to people's portfolios is almost probably a backdoor kind of thing.
Right.
And we're seeing that with the fact that of the almost 2.3 no excuse me yeah, the 2.3 billion that's gone into spot Bitcoin ETFs just this week, in the
Hmm.
first 3 days, 1.9 of it went to BlackRock's IBIT, right? That
Right.
that that's telling. That's telling stuff, right? And now they're advocating to allocate it into other funds across their brand.
Have they
Uh,
done that yet, or are they just talking about those two other funds? Have they
they've
actually
talked about it.
allocated?
They have not actually allocated.
Okay.
They've talked about it, and they've filed something to be able
Right.
to do.
Okay.
So it's coming. But
Hmm.
again, I've been on spaces a few times in other spots, and my thesis really is I can't find a short or medium term downside risk, meaningful evaluation for Bitcoin. I can't
Hmm.
find it because
No.
you've got inflows now that are way ahead of what everybody thought. You have spigots and channels that will continue to be turned on a monthly basis, right?
Hmm.
And then on top of that, you have two of the financial gigachads in Saylor and Larry Fink gobbling up as much Bitcoin as they can possibly get every single day,
Right.
every single week. And the point I made yesterday, who is on the other side of that trade? Who is short Bitcoin right now? Who is thinking, who is making actual financial bets that Bitcoin is going to go in the opposite direction?
I mean, you've got guys like Gareth Soloway, and that's sort of sitting there
Which
with
is a
Michelle
joke.
McCory. Well, but
Which is
that's
a
it.
joke. Yeah.
I know it's a joke, but
Yeah. What
that's.
is
I mean,
he?
there's a few guys, technical sort of trader
Yeah.
guys.
Well, my point is that those two entities,
Right,
Saylor and MicroStrategy, Fink and BlackRock, are nation states effectively buying Bitcoin at size at every opportunity they can.
right,
BlackRock every day, Saylor as often as he can get another 500 million approved from sort of some institution, right?
right.
Um, there is nobody, absolutely nobody of scale on the other side of that trade.
No.
Zero. No one. So it's a pretty remarkable moment right now. It really is.
I agree. Now let's talk about sort of the longer period, right? So let's
Hmm.
just so we kind of and I'm agreeing with your thesis that so we're going to have it's going to take people these RIAs. It's going to change really the fabric because I was talking with Eric from Bloomberg. I met him in L.A. and we were talking and and he's like, well, Fred, the 60-40 is really just it's in stone. Maybe there's 5%. And I was like, Eric, I'm a little older than you, but I mean, 60. This thing was when I was on Wall Street. It was active management. You know what I mean? It wasn't this whole passive. Indexing is God. I understand everybody now is sold on these indexes, and BlackRock, is kind of providing the all this product, this ETF product that everybody's eating, but
Sure.
but Bitcoin things do change, and you know it definitely feels to me like this is a sea change moment when you have this amazing asset that a group of us found, you know,
Hmm.
let's call it 5 years ago, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Inside, right?
Mhm.
And then a group of us found 5 years ago, and the belief of that group is way stronger than anything else on Wall Street, right? There's just like people believe in Bitcoin way more than they believe in FANG stocks,
Sure.
or anything else.
Yeah.
So the level of conviction is just off the charts.
Hmm.
And and we've had 2 months now where this product is even available on the menu, right, for most
Sure.
investors. 2 months
Right.
now. So I gotta believe that you give it 2 years or 3 years, this is going to change fundamentally how people invest. I
Right.
just can't believe that we're gonna be in a world where this is a fringe product in 2 years, 3 years, right? So,
Yeah, I agree. I think that the idea that there's going to be an allocation associated with, let's call it gold, right, 1 to 2% of people's portfolios. I think that's going to happen just passively, like we talked about earlier. But I think that there's going to be a sea change in demographics, right? There's a real reality as as we talk about demographics and wealth management, right? The quote unquote boomer generation. I'm a Gen X guy. As Gen X takes over the portfolios of their boomer parents that pass away, and then ergo some millennials begin to do the same thing with their Gen X parents. Over the course of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, there is going to be a sea change in asset allocation. There's just going to be.
right,
I can't make predictions. I just know that I don't see a space in which Bitcoin isn't higher, short term, medium term, long term. I can't figure out a thesis where that's the case. The only thesis is conspiratorial in nature associated with nation states. That's the only It's the
Right.
only spot where I can get to, and that's a 1% pipe dream of, weirdos of like 7 or 8 tethered truthers that still exist out there.
Right. 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 I mean, yeah. I mean, even if Tether was the next, which I don't think it is, but even if Tether was the next FTX, at this point, it doesn't matter. I would say.
One, it's not going to be. It's a protected asset. It's a protected
Yeah.
organization. It serves as a pseudo, Fed default mechanism across European nations.
Hmm.
I've been told I have enough sources in government organizations that have told me flat out. I have a source that used to work at the SEC, and his wife currently works at the SEC. Um, that Tether is, for all intents and purposes, untouchable. They own tons of treasuries, and there's a nature to Tether by which they understand ways that it's being used, across Europe and across other parts of the world that they're comfortable with. And so you haven't seen any meaningful action or narrative around Tether for 2+ years. On top of that, you've
Well,
seen tech.
Cantor came out and said, "Hey, we've got a
Yeah,
lot of their money."
yeah. Well, that's the point.
Right.
If CEO comes out of Cantor and says we're good, and he's lying, he's got real problems,
Yeah.
right? You can't do that. But again, just behind the curtain a little bit of people that I talk to and send me information, and I've seen it happen again and again. That the truth of what they're telling me. Listen, if the United States government is willing to go and effectively cut off the legs of Binance, the
Okay.
largest cryptocurrency exchange on the planet at the time, don't you think if they wanted to do that to Tether, they could in a moment's notice? Of course they
Right.
could, but they're not going to.
A few other questions just to wrap up, but does MicroStrategy become part of the S&P 500?
I think so. Yeah, yeah. I think
Okay,
so.
and time frame for that? A year? Within a year?
You probably 12 to 18 months. Yeah,
Okay.
12 to 18 months, somewhere in there.
What kind of what does that do for the MSTR? I mean, people who have been shorting MSTR.
Hmm.
When I first looked at it, I was like, okay, this thing is overvalued on a
Hmm.
sort
Hmm.
of sum of the parts analysis, and I sort of did my little sum of the parts, and
Yeah. Hmm.
and it's expensive on the sum of the parts. I still, but now I own it via call options.
It's
But
expensive associated with historical analysis by Wall Street of particular stocks, right?
right, hmm,
But we're trying to do the same with Bitcoin as an asset and as an asset class doesn't
right.
apply. There is no, earnings per share. There is no,
It really feels to me like I don't know if you remember stocks like ICGE or
Mhm,
CMGI back in
mhm, mhm.
and
Yep.
it feels very analogous to CMGI to me,
Yeah. Yeah.
which
Mhm.
is, and I remember CMGI would always trade at 2x the value of their assets. You know,
Right.
I just remember, and ICGE was exactly the same. And people were like, you turn on CNBC and be like, well, the assets are worth X and
Mhm.
it's worth 2x. Isn't that ridiculous? But it
Yeah.
kept on trading at 2x.
Yeah. If I was, if I stay away from things like, price predictions and
Hmm.
telling people what to buy and not what to buy, other than Bitcoin. Um, but if I were evaluating the quote unquote ecosystem slash economy around Bitcoin, the biggest concern I would have, it would be with like mining and mining stocks.
Right.
The consumption electricity, the the government potential control there, regulatory risk, some of that. But other than that, like
But look,
coin.
let's just talk a little bit about that. I'm curious if you've looked at this sort of power law. It was you obviously a math guy.
Mhm.
Have you looked at this power law, Bitcoin in sort of log space and some of the stuff that Giovanni's done recently too?
Yeah. So, what I will tell you, my quote unquote mining background is limited by this. My business partner and the co-founder of our company, he was mining Bitcoin back in 2013, and
Hmm.
he had 3,200 Bitcoin mining machines spread across the Southeast in very electricity friendly spots, right? So he'd
Hmm.
find abandoned buildings or buildings without many tenants. He'd
Hmm.
strike a deal with the owner, blah blah blah. So he is the absolute authority on that stuff. He did it. He bought tons of miners. He ran the company, and then he sold the company. And
Okay.
so his thoughts on mining would be worth, frankly, you doing a show with him.
Yeah. Love to.
And
Yeah.
so, I can't speak to it a ton other than what I know he and I talk about, and the fact that, he continues to be fairly concerned, about, mining
I mean, it definitely seems that there are some smart, like for example, I was talking with Bob Burnett, right, and he runs Barefoot Mining,
Mhm.
and Bob's like, he was like, I'm like, well, look at these P&Ls of Riot and Marathon. I mean, it's like,
Mhm.
it really is just, it's sort of like, you can analyze it all you want. There's nothing to love there, right? In
Right,
terms of
right, correct.
but he's like, no, well, Fred, I've made money in every one of those years, So it
Yeah.
definitely seems that there are some smart operators you know, who can kind of weave around this stuff. But it does also seems to me that in the aggregate, there's the one thing you can't control as a miner is how many other miners enter the space, how much hash rate there is, right?
Right. It's the ultimate arbitrage play, right? You are arbing the numbers on a couple of different fronts. Your cost of energy, and then hash rate slash, how does hash rate move associated with things like halvings, right? How often those
Right.
happen, what happens to price. So there's mathematical arbitrage that's going on with those companies. And if leadership at those companies aren't, relatively close to verified math wizards, I'd be concerned, right?
Yeah, but I mean the one thing that really it was very interesting because this guy Giovanni sort of the first guy to really notice the power law, and I
Uh-huh.
went back and he noticed it in he noticed it in 2014. Okay, that's when he first started noticing it and he started
Yeah,
publishing about it, and
sure.
so and then he kind of like stopped writing about it but
Mhm.
look, the power law, you put this price of Bitcoin in log space. It's undeniable that the price of Bitcoins is a line. It oscillates around a line,
Sure.
and the slope of that line is 6, right? So, basically, Bitcoin is t to the power 6.
Hmm.
Hash rate, as it turns out, is t to the power 12. It's also a power law.
Uh-huh.
Now, uh, you know, you know, running miners at t to the power 12, right?
Yeah,
Where the hash rate, the competition is t to the power 12, and you're getting t to the power 6. And by the way, you have this the mining rewards that's going down 20% a year on average to get to
sure.
your 2x over 4 years.
Right.
That just seems like mathematically that's just a it's a that's a tough equation to be.
It is a tough equation mathematically. I don't know how you square that particular algorithm, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that's probably why my business partner sold his business, 6 years ago,
Yeah.
because he saw
So
that.
mine is a tough business. You can kind of you can make money in it. I'm definitely
Yeah.
there's definitely guys who follow the nits and bit, people looking at individual situations and so on, but it does seem to be a hard business.
Mm-hmm.
But it also does seem that Bitcoin adoption in general,
Yeah.
if I go back to these math things, that is going like the number of Bitcoin addresses is also a power law to cubed, which is also very interesting to me because if you look at price being t to the power 6
Yeah.
and addresses being t to the power cubed,
Yeah.
well, you ratio those and you get Metcalfe's law. So it's growing at the value of the network is, the square of the nodes. And I'm like, oh my God, the math is kind of amazing,
that's what I mean by if you're in the space of mining, and you're not truly a remarkable math mind. I don't know what you're doing there. Like it's an arbitrage.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I don't want to bash too much on mining, but it does seem to me. I've met a bunch of people who are like, I met somebody at sort of this latest Pacific Bitcoin that happened, and back in I think it was back in October or December. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But anyways, he was sitting there and he was explaining to me his plan to open do another mining operation, and I was like, why don't you just buy Bitcoin?
Yeah.
And the only reason I could come up with is that he wanted to raise money. He felt he could raise money for a mining company, but he couldn't raise money just to go buy Bitcoin. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's definitely something where people are attracted to it because there's this sort of I'm doing something.
Right. There's hardware, right? There's some buildings, right? There's some electrical wires somewhere,
right?
And, you can go look at it, right? You can see if something's happening, right? It's equivalent of an AWS, right? There's server farms. That you can, your brain can figure that out, right? So, one of the things before we finish up here, I don't know if this will be on the actual recording or not.
It's pretty good, yeah.
My co-founder and I, we're having a very kind of close-knit crypto get-together and conversations and some, podcast folks in Aspen in late April, and I'd love to invite you to that.
Oh, yeah.
We have, he and I are involved in a particular club that we have access to some really elite residences. And we've got an 8-bedroom house. It's a $30 million house in Aspen. And so we want to bring some people out there. We want to do some shows out there. And Scott Melker is somebody that's going to come out with us.
Oh, yeah. The wolf.
So, yeah. I'll extend a formal invitation to you here in the next couple of weeks, but love to have you out there. Love to do some chats and some talk.
I go there all the time.
Yeah, we'll have a dinner. My business partner lives in Glenwood Springs, so 15 minutes away. Right. And we'll probably we'll have a private chef in and do a dinner, at the house, probably one night. So it'd be a nice deal. It'd be a nice thing.
Okay, Andrew, I really appreciate it. And look, everybody, if you don't already follow Andrew on Twitter, I mean, it's really one of the best Twitter accounts out there. And just really enjoyed the color, and we're going to continue to follow you on Twitter, man. It's great. Talk to you later, man. See ya.
Thanks, Fred. You bet.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.